Okay, so our next guy is Nick Ford.
Hi everybody. I move this thing. There we go. Hi. Today I'm going to talk about a topic that I actually was thinking about just doing myself and replacing the whole talk, but I'm glad we did this because it's so rough that I don't know how well it'll go over. But anyway, so I'm going to try to intertwine this with libertarianism. So this is a Marvel superhero named Squirrel Girl, and basically this is my favorite comic right now. It's called the Unbeatable Squirrel Girl. And a lot of the ways that she defeats criminals or villains in the comic book is that they often underestimate her, or that she often gets a lot of attacks on, and like they don't really notice it. So I was trying to intertwine that with sort of like the idea of death by 1,000 cuts, or small cuts, depends on how you see this sentence, but this idea that to challenge the state in a very, so I'm an anarchist, spoilers, but to challenge the state in a very sort of organized or effective method, one thing that we have to do is, it's not always so bad to be underground, because certainly less people, you know, it'll involve less media, less networking, people will be less aware of what you're doing. But there's also sort of a perceptibility challenge. One of the things that James C. Scott, who talks about the legibility of the state tries to make everything in society very legible, very clear, understood. They can calculate it, put it into methods and stuff like that. If we can sort of counter that tendency of the state, and we can route around that, we become a lot more formidable, because we can be a lot more fluid in our sort of reaction time to whatever the state does, because the state's always trying to put a magnifying glass on us and see what we're doing. They're trying to regulate, control, and basically, you know, boss us around. So one thing to sort of combat this is to develop these networks of sort of organizations that can inflict these small little sort of openings in the state's weaknesses. It's called like a system punt, basically, like the weak point of a given system. And the idea is basically to exploit the sort of central vulnerabilities in the state's capacity. Because the state, after all, is only made out of people. It's only made up of individuals just like us. They're not special. They don't have any special magical authority that gives them the right to rule over other people. You know, they're no more qualified than most other people, at least I think. Certainly, they're pretty consistent low approval ratings proves that. There's another thing that I think that's interesting from Squirrel Girl that's kind of like sort of the alternative way of mediating or dealing with crime, which is that instead of going the Batman route, where you torture the criminal until they confess, then you throw them in jail, and then they get out 2 months later and start killing people again, because that's what always happens. You basically like get to the root of what causes crime to begin with. So in one of the comics of the Unbeatable Squirrel Girl, there's this character called the Hippo Man, and as you would guess, it's an anthropomorphic hippo who has a crazy amount of strength, and he's basically trying to rob a bank. And she's like, "Why are you doing this?" And he's like, "Well, I got turned into without my consent, an anthropomorphic, you know, hippo, and all of a sudden I'm not being fed 20 tons for free every day in a zoo, so I need to rob a bank so I can, feed myself." And she's like, "Well, that's silly. Why don't you just go into construction, or go into demolition, channel all that anger into something more positive for society?" And he's like, "That's not a bad idea, but if it doesn't work out, I'm taking the bank, and I mean the whole bank. I'm not like just robbing the bank. I'm taking the physical bank. And anyway, so I think that's a lot better of a method. You see this also in the Netflix series Daredevil, where he especially loves torturing people. I think maybe more than Batman, which is saying something. And it's just that you get this whole perception from the media that torture actually gets information from people. There's a recent thing from John Oliver on his HBO show about torture, and the fact that they've done quite long sort of like books about like the effects of torture, and that it doesn't really get the information. Two of the cases that the FBI or the NSA, I can't remember who, basically point to and say, see, we got information. One of which, in one of those cases, the information that they got was completely implausible, was basically from like some sort of book or something like that about some sort of ridiculous bomb plot that would never ever work. And the other one turned out to be false. And so basically, like at best, you're going to get ridiculous information that won't help you at all, and at worst, you'll get completely implausible, or you'll get completely false information, even if it's based on real people. So I think there's this sort of myth that, especially the state builds its authority or power up on. See, it's like, see, it doesn't matter if we abuse our authority because there are terrorists out there, and if we just torture them enough, then we'll obviously get the answers we're looking for. So I think that that's sort of an alternative way to look at sort of the way to deal with crime. For me, and one of my inspirations is an anarchist named Voltaire de Cleyre. Her way of looking at crime was very much, it's not so much about it's not so much about like the way that people are born or anything genealogical. It's more about social factors, poverty, strife, conflicts within community, conflicts between the individual and the state, and stuff like that. I think there's a certain extent to where there's like this common libertarian phrase where like every day you basically break 5 laws that you don't know about. And I think there's a certain degree where when you eliminate the state, you're basically you're much more able to not worry about things like that, about crossing these lines that these authority figures seem to think make sense. And yeah, I think there's just sort of a general a lot of possibilities with going sort of the route of basically giving sort of false perceptions of your organization. So there's a lot of organizations that can give sort of certain perception to either the state or other forces that are sort of trying to countervail them. And there are ways to sort of distort signals so it seems like nothing is necessarily going on. One thing that bothers me about a lot of the ways that libertarians do agorism is it's often just a way for them to personally make money. It's not a form of activism or a form of way, and it's not like there's anything wrong with not doing activism, but the way that Samuel Edward Conklin III talked about it with in the New Libertarian Manifesto, I think it's more of a social form of activism, and there's actually ways that you could still do it as a personal project and make money off it and send that signal out to others, but on the other hand, turn that money into funding good community projects and activism and stuff like that, so you can kind of mix the signals there. I'm glad I didn't try to do this into an hour talk because I'm already kind of drawing blanks. But yeah, so on a less serious note, Squirrel Girl is like seriously an awesome comic, and it's very lighthearted and funny, so I recommend everybody to read it. This is all like a roundabout way of just advertising for the comic because I love it so much. But also intertwining with libertarianism, because I do think there's interesting things to think about, even though it's a very funny, lighthearted comic. So anyway, I'm rambling at this point. Thank you.